Now, here's my recommendation. At iftar time, eat dates and keep sipping water till you've completely quenched your thirst. I typically drink 3 to 4 glasses of water in the first hour up after opening my fast. When I fasted during the summer months, I would drink as many as 6 to 8 glasses of water. And this is all before proceeding to have a single morsel of food proper, like bread or rice. Now I'll explain, or at least I'll try to. Okay, see, most of us, when we're experiencing the strain of a fast, we aren't actually technically hungry. It feels like we're hungry because we're craving the relief that comes with food. But our body is buckling under the strain of not the absence of food, but it is the absence of water. It is buckling under the strain of thirst and dehydration. In summary, this is what happens when you cease drinking water. The human body typically has 5 liters of blood, and we need an almost constant supply of water to maintain this blood volume. As soon as we begin to get dehydrated, the blood dries up. A person who's dehydrated from lack of water or loss of fluid, such as in disease states with diarrhea or vomiting, such a person is left with a blood volume that is less than 5 liters. There's a 1-to-1 ratio with the severity of dehydration. If you are dehydrated by 10%, you lose 500 milliliters of fluid, that means that you will be left with about 500 milliliters less of blood. I believe there is a perfect correlation. I could be wrong on this, but nonetheless there is a correlation, a strong correlation nonetheless. Okay, so being dehydrated means you lose blood volume. Now that thick and sluggish blood that you have been left with, it nonetheless has to be forced around your body, and this means that the instrument that is responsible for the circulation, your heart, will now have to pump harder and faster to maintain that equilibrium. And this, brothers and sisters, is how fasting compromises your capacity for physical exertion, and how it makes you feel sick. If you walk up the stairs in a fasted state, your heart has to pump much harder to make sure that dehydrated blood still circulates around your system. Now here's the science about hydration. If you drink only water at iftar, the water will reach your digestive tract, and it will sit there, and it could take hours for all of it to get taken up and reach your blood. Anything that has sugar in it helps the human body to soak up water. In fact, there's actually a ratio of sugar water that has been determined in human experiments to promote optimal rehydration. And this golden ratio is 6 to 8 grams of sugar for 100 milliliters of fluid or 100 milliliters of water. If there is either more sugar or less sugar than this 6 to 8%, the body will struggle to absorb the water. And as I understand, this golden ratio is part of the recipe of soft drinks. It comes to 15 to 20 grams of sugar for every 250 milliliter standard glass of water. And if you follow this recipe, you'll note that this is where every sweet drink tastes just right. Now, as you may have guessed, there is something better and more functional when it comes to rehydration than just a sugary drink. And what is better and more functional than the latter is to drink water with a sugary fruit, but not just any sugary fruit, a sugary fruit that has fiber in it. But further than that, not just any kind of fiber. Fiber is of two kinds. There is insoluble fiber and there is soluble fiber. And what we're targeting when we're trying to rehydrate is insoluble fiber. And insoluble fiber is a component of foods from the carbohydrate group that functions like a mechanical instrument in that it pushes food and water through your digestive tract. Such that if you've drunk a lot of water and it's just sitting there inside your intestine and you eat something like dates that has a lot of insoluble fiber in it. The insoluble fiber content, it will act like kind of like a piston and it will force the water through and promote the uptake in your bloodstream of the water. So there are certain foods or certain fruits that are rich in insoluble fiber, and the chief example of that is, of course, it's dates. But an important consideration alongside that is that, like I said, there are two types of fiber. The other is soluble fiber, and not only does this other kind, soluble fiber, fail to promote the uptake of water in your bloodstream, it actually can obstruct the process, such that you can think of it this way. If you've ever used this common remedy that Pakistani Hakeems like to prescribe, in Pakistani lingo, it's the substance, it's known as Isbagol Chilka. In English, it's psyllium husk. Well, that's all soluble fiber. And if you take psyllium husk and you add it to water, you'll notice that it gels up. So that's what soluble fiber does. It soaks up and it becomes like a gel or a ball. Another example is if you take whole grains and then you boil them in water, you notice that they begin to expand. So if you are trying to rehydrate and you drink a lot of fluid, but alongside that you eat a food that has a high soluble fiber content, then that food will soak up the water while it's still in your digestive tract. And if there is too much of it, it can even act like a mechanical obstruction, which the water has to, at once it has to avoid gelling up with that, and it also has to bypass that so that it can reach the walls of your intestine and get soaked up by your bloodstream. So there is a lot of complication with consuming a food that has soluble fiber in it. Some fruits do have significant quantities of soluble fiber, like the flesh of apples. But most of all, I should say, the chief source of soluble fiber in our diet is whole grains. So that is why one has to be very careful if there is bread at your iftar table, that it is not advisable to eat bread before you fully rehydrate. But I will have to cite something, and that is that the Prophet ﷺ in one hadith is reported to have opened his fast with a piece of barley bread. But of course, that was in the event that there was absolutely nothing else to open the fast with. Now, to wrap up, let me leave you with a final consideration and final nail in the coffin, and that is that if you eat if you eat one of the fruits rather, such as the ones that I've mentioned that are basically designed to rehydrate the human body, like dates, with very little soluble fiber content, high insoluble fiber content. These foods put very little demand on the digestive tract because they have very little protein. Now, if you proceed to eat a food that has high protein content and you combine it with bread, such as if you're eating a burger at iftar time, so not only then are you blocking the process of rehydration, you are actually putting a demand on your digestive system to secrete the necessary gastric juices that will break down the protein. And for that, the blood has to force itself towards the digestive tract. And like I've said ad nauseum in this presentation, unless you rehydrate, your blood volume is compromised and your blood is thick and sluggish. So eating a burger at iftar time prior to having fully rehydrated is it's like burning a candle at both ends. A double-edged sword. Not only have you produced a mechanical obstruction in the way of rehydration, you've actually put a demand for the blood to reach your digestive tract. It's very simple, brothers and sisters. Wait for about half an hour or maybe 45 minutes at the most if you're extremely dehydrated, and just eat your dates and drink your water, and then get back to me and tell me if you don't feel right, so I can understand if there are perhaps any other considerations that have escaped me. For as long as I've been practicing this, which is, I believe, somewhere in the ballpark of 10 to 12 years, I have been practicing this. Alright, I will inshallah get back with the sister of this presentation, which is the most common mistake that we make at suhoor time, and you can probably guess what that is now. It is in fact the mirror image of what we discussed today. I will get back inshallah.